Hi, my name is Sydney Walden, and I did my capstone project on repositioning slings. My practicum hours were completed in the hospital setting on a neurology and epilepsy floor. This floor has 25 beds and accepted patients with floor and progressive orders. This floor takes patients that are 16 years old and above. My practicum hours were completed with the patient care manager of this unit. An interesting fact about my practicum setting was that all of the epilepsy admissions that this floor took were scheduled admissions. So the patients would call ahead and tell the healthcare providers what caused their seizures at home. We would try to mimic that same environment, connect them to an EEG monitor, and witness the seizure in a controlled environment. This way we could tell what kind of seizure they were having and make a treatment plan specific for them. The goal of my project is to reduce musculoskeletal injuries among nurses and decrease the occurrence of pressure injuries among patients by increasing the use of repositioning slings and the mechanical lift. This topic is important because in 2012, healthcare providers suffered more musculoskeletal injuries than construction, mining, and manufacturing workers. According to Liberty Mutual, which is the largest workers' compensation insurance provider in the United States, overexertion injuries, including lifting, pushing, pulling, holding, carrying, or throwing an object, cost employers $13.4 billion every year. According to American Nurse Today, one estimate suggests that the average nurse lifts 1.8 tons per shift. The 2014 International Pressure Ulcer Guidelines state that the healthcare worker should use manual handling aids, such as the repositioning sling, to reduce friction and shear. Lift, don't drag the individual while repositioning. This becomes especially important in our older population because their skin tears very easily and is very slow to heal. The learning objectives for my capstone project are as follows. First, perform an assessment on the nursing staff's knowledge of the appropriate use of repositioning slings and the mechanical lift, and find out what their barriers to use are. Next, develop educational materials that teach about the importance of the repositioning slings and when to put them into use according to UK's best practice policy. And finally, discuss with my preceptor the data that I've collected from her nursing staff and to positively influence her to enforce the use of repositioning slings on the unit. For the implementation of my project, first, I developed a questionnaire to send out to staff on the unit in order to assess their knowledge, current use of repositioning slings, and find out what their barriers to use are. Next, I developed a flyer that was hung in the bathroom as part of the potty press, which is a large board that sits in the bathroom where all the staff know to look for important updates. And I also hung it in the break room and gave it to healthcare workers in the hallway to make sure that no one was missed. Next, I sent out the same questionnaire to determine if the staff learned anything from my flyer. Finally, I presented the data I collected to my preceptor, which I stated was the manager of the unit. I hope the information I gathered will help her make a positive impact on this unit. The questions asked in my questionnaire were, number 1, do you use a repositioning sling on patients who score less than a 5 on the mobility scale? In order to get a 5, you have to be able to ambulate independently in the hallway and your room and reposition yourself when prompted every 2 hours without help from the nurse. Secondly, do you turn and reposition your patients every 2 hours? Third, do you use the mechanical lift when repositioning your patients? If not, how come? And the fourth, do you believe that the use of repositioning slings and the mechanical lift is beneficial for the nurse and the patient? These are my initial questionnaire results. For question 1, which is do you use a repositioning sling on patients who score less than a 5 on the mobility scale, only 16% of the nurses on the unit say they currently do this. For question 2, do you turn and reposition your patient every 2 hours? Only 41% say they currently do this. Question 3, do you use the mechanical lift when repositioning your patients? Only 8% say they do this. And for question 4, do you believe that the use of repositioning slings and the mechanical lift is beneficial for the nurse and patient? 91% of the nurses on this unit say that they believe that. My final results. After sending out the questionnaire again following my education, there was a huge improvement in the answers to question 1, which addressed using repositioning slings on patients less than a 5 on the mobility scale. This result improved from 16 to 40%. The result to question 2, which addressed repositioning patients every 2 hours, also improved from 41 to 60%. I didn't see any improvement in my results for question 3 and question 4. For question 3, I did gather their barriers to use, which I will discuss later. And for question 4, I already had 91% say they currently do this in their practice, so I didn't expect much improvement there. What I saw in my practicum was that the nursing staff did not have immediate access to mechanical lifting devices, and that repositioning slings were not being used according to UK's best practice policy. And another interesting fact was that the repositioning slings were not being stocked on their unit by materials. What I read was that the mechanical lifts should be available to healthcare providers to reposition their patients each time. And repositioning slings should be used on all patients who score less than a 5 on the mobility scale, which means they can ambulate and reposition independently. The nurses stated that due to working in an older part of the hospital, they do not have access to the ceiling mechanical lift device. They instead have a portable device that is large and bulky and shared with their entire floor. They have semi-private rooms, meaning they are shared by multiple patients. They don't have room to bring the portable mechanical lift into the room. You can imagine these are your typical patient rooms with 3 patients, the nursing supplies, the patient's belongings, their family. There isn't room for a 3-foot by 4-foot at the base device to come in. It's just not practical. The nurses expressed a desire for the ceiling mechanical lift and said if they were readily available, they would use them when repositioning their patients. When to use a repositioning sling according to UK policy. Repositioning slings need to be part of the bed makeup for any patient that scores less than a 5 on the mobility scale or cannot turn independently every 2 hours. The repositioning sling should be attached to the ceiling lift every time you need to turn the patient or move them up in bed. The repositioning sling and the mechanical lift make it so that you can reposition the patient on your own, as shown in this picture. So you don't have to wait for 2 to 3 people to help you, and makes it more practical that a patient would be turned every 2 hours. The personal effect of my practicum. I spent my practicum experience shadowing a patient care manager. Throughout my time this semester, I was able to sit in on interviews for potential new hires and give my opinion. I was also able to go to manager-only meetings that address staffing in the hospital I currently work in. This was a huge opportunity and opened my eyes to what goes on behind the scenes and how hard my manager works to staff my unit. I was also able to listen in as the manager handled conflicts between many staff members. And these are my references. Thank you.